see if this works. Okay. Hello, everybody. I wanted to come back onto my channel. I'm going to start putting more videos up because I understand that my role and what's about to happen on this planet is to help uplift the consciousness of our community. And what that really looks like is helping our community see the ways in which they bought into their own demise and own mental entrapment through engaging with this material world, this false society that we live in, and other traps, pitfalls, and barriers that they may not even know that they are a part of. So before I even get started, I really want to preface this discussion because I know a lot of the times people love taking my words, twisting them, and spitting them out of context. I also know that as a dark-skinned Black woman, that anything that I will say will be used against me. And I also know that because of my identity and because I'm so outspoken, that I'm always labeled as being angry or stirring the pot, when we're actually just trying to help people free themselves so that we can move forward as a society. So this message may fall on deaf ears, and honestly, that's not my problem because, for me personally, having done as much spiritual work, as much healing work, as much emotional development as I have on myself, a lot of individuals in the society, I would say maybe 98%, have not really gone down that road and really have not done that work. So there's not shit that you're about to tell me about the message that I'm about to share here today. So if you find yourself offended, that is a really clear tell sign that you are probably under the illusion of some of the factors that we're going to be talking about later on in this video. So I want to first start by saying when I'm talking about whiteness, let me give a clear definition. When I'm talking about whiteness, I am not specifically discussing individuals who have white skin. We have to make that distinction clear because I feel like we forget the forest for the trees. And we just get so involved in the details. Well, I'm not white, and I'm from this country, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about whiteness as a state of mind, whiteness as a culture, whiteness as a method of operation. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about whiteness. I'm talking about behaviors. I'm talking about thought patterns. I'm talking about cultures. I'm talking about social dynamics because the society that we live in Western culture is dominated by whiteness. So not only have white folks been impacted, right, and lost their humanity through the engagement of whiteness and taking on white identity, people of color, and when I say people of color, I mean Black, Indigenous, non-Black persons of color, okay? And people of color have also now started to absorb and digest and enact and assimilate to whiteness as well as a form of survival. However, this is going to be for another video. We're no longer in a point where we need to survive. Okay, so we can start to actually unpack from some of those dynamics and heal from some of those dynamics and let that toxicity go. So, whiteness. So we see what is happening right now in the world. The Amazon on fire for the past 3 weeks. Okay, the border crisis. Okay, police brutality, the upcoming economic crisis, and the environmental crisis that we are all in. All of these issues that I just mentioned have their root in whiteness. And I'm going to break down each and every last one of those issues and how they relate to whiteness. So, I forgot mass shootings as well in accordance with police brutality. So when we're talking about, first, the thing about whiteness is that whiteness forces you to separate from yourself because whiteness is a lie, right? The lie of whiteness is that because you have whiter skin or because you take on some of the attributes of whiteness or white culture, that you are somehow superior, right? And in many ways, because of the way society is set up, when you facilitate whiteness as a person of color or as a white person, you are able to get through certain doors in society that many people are not able to because they don't embody the toxicity of whiteness, which is an energy and it's a vibration. So, for some of you who talk about, I've done my healing work and I'm an ally, just save that talk because we can feel it. It's not what you say. It's actually the energy that you give off, and I want to use some pop culture references. Kendrick Lamar, Don't Kill My Vibe. We can feel your energy before you even speak because we've been dealing with the toxicity, the dehumanization since we were children. So we're very familiar with the pattern. So that's something I wanted to put out there. You're not fooling nobody. Okay. So something else that I wanted to talk about, whiteness, the way in which whiteness operates is in the disconnection from self. By separating yourself from your higher power, from your indigeneity, from what from your original nature, it allows whiteness to seep in and perpetuate materialism, which is where we get violence, which is where we get wars, which is where we get this faulty economic system, which is where we get greed. Another thing about whiteness, and you guys can go ahead and look up this document, it's called White Supremacy Culture. And it's very powerful because it breaks down just in real time how whiteness works. Another aspect of whiteness is very logical, okay? Because it comes from the masculine aspect of the mind, which categorizes, right? And seeks to dominate and wants power. And when we're talking about that, whiteness and the obsession with logic, because if it's not written down, if I can't measure it, if I can't see it, then it must not be real, right? So when we talk about microaggressions and we talk about like indigenous cultures and things that are sacred to us, folks who are engaged in whiteness, they can't understand that because in their mind, if I can't see it, if I can't measure it, it's not real. Okay. Another aspect of whiteness that is very traumatizing, right, is this cognitive dissonance, because whiteness makes you take on lies in society. When you are confronted with the truth that other people have to live through day to day, it starts to promote something that we call cognitive dissonance, where you begin to actually act out and explode and become defensive because the truths that you have held, which are actually lies under whiteness, are now being broken down and confronted right in your face with the truth, right, that many people have to live. And especially when those truths are backed by facts and statistics and research, all hell is going to break loose. That's another aspect of whiteness, how we have to discuss. Another thing about whiteness is, I think the number one thing, the primary identifying factor is the desecration of the sacred, is the desecration of the feminine. Whiteness inherently rejects anything having to do with indigeneity and originality, because that is actually where the real power is. So if I can actually disconnect you from your original power source, reconnect you to this fake, false, toxic power system of whiteness, right? Then you will be confused as to what the solution is to take me out of power and to get your power back. You will be confused when you participate in your own demise because, this is just a part of the culture. You'll be confused, right, when you start to actually enact violence and harm, which we call horizontal violence, onto people who look exactly like you because they don't think like you. Right? Whiteness will allow you to do that. Another thing too is when we see situations like Standing Rock, Mauna Kea, please, forgive me if I didn't pronounce it correctly. What we see is this desecration of the sacred once again, because whiteness is anti-sacred. That's the thing. It's anti-sacred because remember, whiteness is very material and the sacred is not, it's very ethereal. So in order to get you to engage in your own demise, it forces you to continue to disconnect from that ethereal and continue to engage in the material where they have more power over you. Okay, so when we're talking about these different sacred sites and they're wondering, well, why are these brown people so upset that we're going to come and build like a whole mine here or a telescope that we don't need? Because when we're talking about the sacred and we're talking about the indigenous, that is a power that's actually more potent than the power of whiteness and the power of government and the power of business, which whiteness runs, right? And another thing too, is when we're talking about the sacred and how and the disrespect and disoppression of the sacred, because remember I talked about if they can't measure it, then it must not be real, is also then the hijacking and utilization of the sacred to subjugate individuals. And we see this a lot through, white folks engaging in indigenous technologies and healing practices, etc. And then, completely utilizing it for their own, to dominate society. And we see a lot of this through, the use of symbolism, sound, different types of psychological control through music and entertainment, etc. These are all actually different forms of technology that our ancestors had developed that were then hijacked by whiteness and then utilized against us. Okay, so that is what whiteness is in a nutshell. Now let's talk about how whiteness is operating and is the root cause of why our planet is currently perishing. So let's start with the Amazon fire. And this is something that is very near and dear to my heart, not because I'm an earth sign, but for the simple fact that that is one of the most sacred sites on the planet, one of the last sacred sites on the planet. The Amazon has been around for thousands of years. Can you imagine all the ceremonies that have gone down in that forest? Can you imagine people's lives, the stories, right, that have now been lost because the Brazilian government thinks that farming and profit is more important than the sacred? That's the first operation of whiteness in this situation that we're talking about here. And someone stupidly commented on my post and was like, well, Brazilians aren't white. Let me tell you something. When we are talking about white individuals, right, it's anybody who has the European descent. So it does not matter because they traveled over to Brazil 200 years ago, they are still white. Their Portuguese is European, Spanish is European, Dutch is European, okay? So English is European. Just because they speak different languages and they may have freckles here and a tan here, Italian is European. Granted that Sicilians are mixed with African and Moroccan, etc., they are still Europeans, right? So we're still dealing with that same toxic whiteness operating through these men, the desecration of the sacred, right? The materialism over the sacred in this situation with the Amazon, because we all know that they purposely set that rainforest on fire so that they can go and set up their farms and whatnot to reap profit. When we are in an environmental catastrophe, can you imagine that? For you to not even think about, well, what about the rest of the planet? What about neighboring countries? What if the smoke, and all the sacred plants like picote, ayahuasca that are in the forest, right? What happens if these particles get into the air? What's going to happen to people, right? What is the consequences of this long term? People, they don't think about that, because when you operate out of whiteness, you also operate out of scarcity mentality, which is another thing that I forgot to mention earlier. So I want to keep going. So now you see how whiteness is operating in this whole situation with the Amazonian forest. Let's jump into the border crisis. We already know, that whiteness is the number one motivating factor for that border crisis. First, in the facilitation of these trade agreements, which destroyed these communities and actually forced them out into the Americas in the first place, because unbeknownst to us as Americans, people actually don't want to be here. This is actually not really a cool place to actually be. If we didn't destroy other people's countries, they wouldn't want to be here. Newsflash, right? So when we're discussing what's happening at the border right now, it's really important for us to also identify the ways in which whiteness is perpetuating the death of children and families. Because whiteness is also about fear, right? And it's also about self-preservation. So in their minds, well, if we have all these brown folks coming in and they're taking our jobs and they're going to, mix us all out and, we're going to become the minority. Oh, no, we can't have that. So we need to set up a situation to exterminate these people, because that's what whiteness is about. It's about elimination and extermination of anything that is not alignment with whiteness, that is not in alignment with white skin, white ideology, white thinking, white behavior, white supremacy. That's what's driving the border crisis. And for those of you who think that this is about to end, you have no idea, because I'm going to get into some of the metaphysical aspects of what's happening with some of these situations as well in another video. But the energy and pain and the energy behind the pain and suffering that we are experiencing globally from watching and being impacted by the situation is not, it's a force of feeding for these individuals, because that's how a lot of them feed. They feed off of our trauma. Okay, so another thing that I want to add, because I'm also live. Oh, let me get my phone. Let me get my computer charger, because we're gonna have a bigger problem. Okay, so anyways, like I was saying, the pain, the suffering that's generated from, both us who are watching this stuff and understand what is happening, and for the individuals who are experiencing, is a form of food for these folks in positions of power. They literally feed off of the suffering of these children. Imagine the sickness that one person has to be in order to justify the death of children in the name of whiteness. Oh, well, they don't belong here anyways. They're illegal. Who is illegal? Who is illegal in a country that was founded off of genocide? What? So anyways, let's keep going. Now let's talk about mass shootings. So we talked about the Amazon. We talked about what's happening at the border, which is all about slow genocide and elimination. And also another thing that it's about too, what's happening at the border, it's also about free labor. Because remember, whiteness is all about materialism. So they can find a way to cut costs and cut profits, quantity over quality. They will do that. If they can find a way to maybe enslave these children to do free work for them, that's exactly what they're going to do. Because shootings and policing, I feel like policing, I'm not even going to actually, we'll see if we can go into that. Let's talk about policing. Policing is directly connected to the preservation of whiteness. How? Folks may not know this, but policing was actually birthed directly out of slave catching and slave patrolling. That is how the police were brought about. So you mean to tell me that in an institution that was actually in the monitoring, extermination, rounding up and terrorizing of Black people is now supposed to turn around 100 something years later and then support and protect those people. It's not about to happen. Now, when we're talking about policing within our communities, something that we have to also understand is all these shootings and killing of Black people and them getting off with it and not going to jail and all of that stuff. What they're trying to let us know is that our lives not only don't matter to them, but that it's open season on Black and brown people. So that's something that we have to be aware of. That's really the mind trick. And if they can get you into that state of mind of fear and stress and anxiety, it's going to weaken you spiritually. It's going to weaken your aura. It's going to cause physical health issues. And what will happen is by the time it's really ready for you to use your right mind, when something happens or whatnot, you won't be able to, because you're going to be so trapped in fear. You're going to be stressed out, etc. They're trying to weaken us is what I'm trying to say. They're trying to terrorize us, right? So that we feel like we are powerless and that we don't have an opportunity to fight. Another thing that I do want to add to when we're talking about policing and whiteness is, remember I talked about when it comes to whiteness, an aspect of whiteness is going into the sacred, hijacking it, bastardizing it, making it more masculine in nature, and then using it against target populations. So when we're talking about the police, something you have to also understand is, in many ways, they are a secret society and they are a gang, and they do have initiations and rituals that they do to protect themselves and their friends. Why do you think they can't get fired? They have a written law, which is a form of word magic called the Police Bill of Rights, that protects them from when they do their shenanigans and their dirt. And also another thing too you have to understand is a lot of these police are a part of the Masonic temple. They're a part of the Scottish Rite temples. They're Rosicrucians. They're part of these different secret societies that are known for recruiting people straight out of college, straight out of the academy. They are in cahoots. So, police chiefs and politicians and these business owners, and they're all in cahoots with each other because they went to the same colleges and institutions. They were in the same fraternities, sororities. They graduate to getting into these secret societies as another form of having power over people, and nothing changes because they're all in cahoots with one another. So that's something that you also need to realize, that we're not dealing with just like policies and training people. You're dealing with a supernatural force that is actually utilizing bastardized indigenous knowledge to continue. So there's that. And the last thing I want to talk about is these mass shootings. These mass shootings. So, folks may not realize this, but the majority of white males are sick in the head. And they are sick because white culture is sick. So white culture, where you sit on the internet, 4chan, Reddit, and all these different things, and you watch crazy videos, you say crazy things to other people, you organize and plan attacks, you perpetuate and you spew toxicity on the internet. And for some reason, these tech companies, they can shut down whole advocacy groups, but they can't find these different individuals online, okay? And because these white men are so embedded in white culture and they're so committed to it being sustainable, what they are then doing is they utilize mass shootings and creating terror and panic as a way to continue to hold power. Because what they're trying to tell people of color is that they're still in charge. But you have to also understand it's because they are in that thought frequency of whiteness and subjugation and destroy people of color. It's a collective consciousness that they are a part of. It's a collective consciousness that these white men, they embody and that they are a part of. And the general consensus is that people of color, equal rights, etc., is the death of white men. They see it as a direct threat to their life. Why? Because whiteness is all about preserving power for a few. That's a part of white supremacy culture. So when we see these mass shootings and they say, oh, he has mental health problems, mental health or this demonic possession, because we forget the two are not the same. Someone can have mental health challenges induced by living in a society, induced by external factors such as diet, trauma, etc., and internal factors such as ancestry, DNA, etc. But when we're talking about these white men, we have to understand that they are sociopaths and narcissists and psychopathic in nature, and even psychotic in nature. We're not dealing with just individuals who just happen to, they came across a chat room and they were radicalized. There was something already wrong with them. That's what we're failing to understand, because remember, we're dealing with generational toxicity. We're dealing with generational mental illness and a demon possession. We're dealing with generational whiteness, which only solidifies itself in each cycle and each replication of the bloodline. So when we're talking about these white men being mentally ill, oh yeah, they're ill, all right, but they're ill in the spiritual world. It has nothing to do with mental health because a lot of them are very clear and aware about what they are doing, and they want to facilitate pain and chaos and harm because remember I told you it's a form of food for them. They eat, they feast. The thought of being memorialized forever for killing people, for causing so much pain and chaos and suffering, that's narcissism because it's all about how do I have control? How do I have recognition? How do I get attention? That's something that we need to really start talking about. And you know, what really kills me is when folks of color, we speak up and out about racism and some of the stuff going on in the community. And you have these crazy ass white folks and assimilated people of color saying, well, you know, we should all just work together and we all just need to be friends. And, you know, you're making people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable for what? When we have people going into schools and killing children. Can you understand how fucked we are as a society for you to turn around and try to blacklist and gaslight and demonize the people who are actually trying to raise awareness about some of these issues? Because subconsciously, whiteness is all about, when people embody whiteness, it's all about how do I protect it too? How do I make it so that I'm as comfortable as possible? And when you start to challenge the status quo and raise awareness about what's happening and really start to ask critical questions, it brings up subconscious uncomfortability for these individuals who are in alignment because they subconsciously know that not only have they been exposed, but that their time is coming to an end. So I just wanted to put this video out here today because it seems it's like where we are going in society is going to be to a point where whiteness is the number one threat to our society, period. I don't care what no one says. Climate change, as we just discussed, that's caused by whiteness and Western culture, okay? Trauma, as we saw again, that's caused by whiteness, structural violence, okay? We are talking about police violence. We're talking about having race wars. Again, that is caused by whiteness and structural violence. So if you find yourself watching this and you know that you started to embody the ideology of whiteness and you impacted other people in a negative way, both peoples of color and white folks, right? Do the work on yourself. Do the work, because I'm telling you right now, we're in a point right now where we're in a reckoning. So all of this, if y'all think this is about to continue for another 5, 10, 20 years, we're going to have conferences and diversity panels and all this stuff. You are sadly mistaken because I'm gonna talk about this in another video that I'm gonna make. There's a new regime in order here. I don't know if you guys know this. There's different factions. Not all white supremacists are even created the same. That's the funny thing, because you see that they will go to war with each other, right, over power. There is the government faction. There's the business faction, which is hand in hand with the government. We have the tech faction and regime. We have the entertainment faction and regime. And then lastly, we have the new age spirituality, love and light regime, and that their whole thing is do what you want, love and light. You create your mind creates your reality. If you're systemically oppressed or the police are killing people, it's because you thought of it and you attracted it. Those type of people, that level of thinking is what wants to be predominant in this society. And a lot of that thinking in that community was started by Marianne Williamson, who is now running for president. And y'all are so stupid and pay no fucking attention to people's past. And you don't even see the legacy that they have behind them and what's going to be coming to the forefront. So I want to leave that right there for today. I've gone on long enough. Thank you so much for listening to my video, and please stay tuned for more of my uncomfortable conversation videos.